Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is a live stream looking at one of the most mysterious topics in the entire world of A Song of Ice and Fire. We're looking at the far east of Essos. We're looking at the great empire of the Dawn, the Five Forts. We're looking at the Amethyst Empress. We're looking at the Bloodstone Emperor, the Long Night, Yeeti, all of that kind of stuff. And who we have today to help us work our way through it is one of the maestros of the A Song of Ice and Fire community, one of the people who know the history of Westeros better than pretty much anyone. I'm talking Mr. History of Westeros, Aziz. Do you want to say hi?
I sure do. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on, Robert. It's super fun to be here. And this is, like you said, it's a great topic. I called it right before we went live. I think it's kind of like fantasy archaeology, right? We're really digging deep into supernatural history and stuff that has the underpinnings for a lot of the main story in kind of surprising ways and very mysterious ways. So yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. So as always, the way I'm going to frame this, I'm going to look, I've got a few questions from my patrons that I'll kind of work my way through. We're going to look, I think, first of all, a little bit about the history and background, so we're all on the same page. Then we're going to move on to the Bloodstone Emperor, the Blood Betrayal, the Long Night, all of those kind of links there, because the mythology over there has got a lot of links across to what we know of about the mythology of the Long Night over in Westeros. And then we also want to look, I think, at the Five Forts, which are hugely mysterious. And Aziz, as I've got you here, and as I know you know so many of these things off the top of your head, I thought it'd be really good. Could you give us like the 1 minute potted, what is Yeeti? What's starting at the beginning and sort of the history? What are we looking at here? What is the Empire of the Dawn?
Sure. Well, we were first introduced to some of these ancient concepts very early on in A Game of Thrones, the first book, I mean, not the show. And for example, Bran seeing in his coma dreams dragons and Asshai, and Dany right away or very early on gets things associated with Asshai. Dragons and Asshai are linked within the very, very early parts of the books. And then much, much later, I think George changed some of his mind on a few things. I think the original plan was for Dany to actually go to Asshai. And I think he changed his mind and is instead going to show it through history and flashbacks, like maybe Melisandre's chapter. And with that, he's, with the World Book and potentially with things to come in A Song of Ice and Fire, he's expanded on this topic greatly. And as I said, it anchors or underpins a lot of the history and supernatural elements to dragons, and explains perhaps the Targaryens' look, well, the Valyrian look, I suppose we could say, and as well as some of the mysteries with their blood, meaning, you know, the idea that the Targaryens have blood of the dragon went from a cool thing to say to a wait, they actually do have a little bit of actual dragon blood in them, don't they? And this all originates apparently from a culture, a huge, maybe world-spanning culture, an empire perhaps, that existed before the Long Night. And there's evidence, archaeological evidence and magical evidence and other things that all lead to it and point it in this direction. But what's one of the things that's so fascinating about it is that these things come up in so many disparate places, as far west as the Iron Islands and as far east as, well, as far east as the map goes, which we know goes farther than we can see. But so basically, this is a topic that spans almost the entire known world, which makes it very unique. So that was a little longer than 1 minute, but hopefully that's a good start. And of course, there's so many other things I didn't touch on there. Asshai was probably the center of it, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess that's a good way to get started.
I think so. And just for those wondering, the lighting in your background is an intentional nod to the different colors of the different dynasties within Yeeti. And I'm sure we will talk about House Dayne, which is the sigil on your T-shirt. There is a possible link there across to Yi, to the Great Empire of the Dawn, and all the rest of it. So just to sort of clarify where we're at, what we're talking about is a culture which is ancient, possibly the most ancient culture we've got in the entirety of this world of ice and fire. And it starts before the Long Night. So when we're thinking about the Long Night over in Westeros, this started way before that. And the Great Empire of the Dawn happened before the Long Night. The legends we have of the Long Night happen at the end of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and when we start getting this Golden Empire of Yi a little bit after that. So
yeah,
what we're looking at to start with is the equivalent of the sort of the Dawn of Days, a little bit heading into the Age of Heroes and all this. This is legendary stuff. This isn't necessarily specific history, and we don't have huge amounts of exact details. How seriously do you think we should take these stories that we do have, though?
Well, I think we should take them pretty seriously because they very much parallel things that we can see happening in current times, with Dany having this vision of her ancestors so very, very early in her arc, and with all these other ties to Asshai and the origin of dragons and the shadow, also again very early in her arc. I need to remind everybody that A Game of Thrones was originally planned to be 3 books, and thus there's an unusual fact about Game of Thrones Book 1 is that it's written differently. It's written with a lot more foreshadowing for the Endgame put right in. George loves to, in a character's first chapter, there's a pattern where he loves to give clues to their eventual endgame. For example, if you go back and read Bran 1 with the idea that he's going to be king, you go, oh, it's there. You start seeing it right away. Same with a lot of the stuff with Dany. Now, of course, it doesn't all tie into what we saw at the TV show, but these general points are there. And so I take the early elements a little more seriously than things that were added on later, because they're clearly part of George's core intent. And most of that is still there. A few things have changed. And one of the things that's part of that core story, before the Iron Islands were expanded on, before the Martells were expanded on, before the 5-year gap was added to the story, George had already planned for House Dayne and Dawn and Starfall, as well as, Ashara and some of these other things, to be very important. And he gave them genetic imprints that don't fit anything else in Westeros. It's a common misconception that the Dane's purple eyes relates them to Valyria. But George has explicitly said that is not the case. So either they have some sort of common ancestor, some common, something that they both branched off of, like some common ancestor that the Targaryens or Valyrians came out of this, and the Danes came out of it this way. So they directly relate back to some really ancient common bloodline. But the concept of things like Dawn, the sword, it's not possible to have made that in 5,000 years ago, given Westerosi technology. So something else, or 10,000 years ago, something else had to be there. Some greater power had to exist, some sort of culture that had figured these things out, had to be there. And since that's before Valyria, since it's before Valyrian steel, since it's before Valyrian dragon taming, well, maybe it's not the Great Empire of the Dawn. Maybe these clues lead to something else. But there's definitely something there. There's definitely this technology that existed before the Long Night. There's definitely dragons before Valyria. There's definitely Dany's ancient ancestors that she's dreamt of that have these same, cool colors. And there's definitely an ancestor of House Dayne that is not Valyria. And so you put all that together and you got something, whether it's the Great Empire of the Dawn or something else. There's a lot there.
There is a lot there. I want to get onto House Dayne a little bit later. So okay. Just hold your House Dayne horses for 1 second. But I think this is a really important point. So Yi, what we know today as Yi, that area seems to have been the cradle of civilization in some way. And what we're looking at is technology has in many ways gone backwards in Planetos. When you go to YT nowadays, you see they've got these stone roads that are just as good quality as the Valyrian roads that were there, and yet they seem to have been done thousands of years earlier. You get the 5 forts that, again, we're going to come on to, that are magnificent, that seem to be made from the same kind of stuff that things like the Valyrian roads are made of, and the base of the high towers made of. There are hints that there was this civilization which existed way before anything else we know about, that spread across pretty much the whole world, or at least had contacts across the whole world. And so that is what we're talking about when we're talking about the Great Empire of the Dawn. Now, I just want to, before we get any further, we had a couple of super stickers before we went live. I just want to thank people. Maura Lee, thank you so much. I got your questions on Patreon. We will come to them in just one moment. And also Ariel Winchester, thank you. I really appreciate that. The question that Maura was asking was about the background to the Great Empire of the Dawn, particularly the various emperors named after jewels and so on. So at a high level, what's the sort of the background here? When we're talking about this great empire before the Long Night, it descended, the legends go, from the gods, did it not?
Yeah, it really did. And they kind of, a lot like the Age of Heroes in Westeros, there's these long, apparently very long-lived, unrealistically, quote-unquote, long-lived figures that were ruled for hundreds of years at a time. That they sound like, it sounds like their own version of the Age of Heroes, even though maybe it could have been a lot farther back in the past than the Westeros version. But basically, you have these larger-than-life characters that did things that don't seem possible for modern humans, that might be tall tales, but might be just the drift of history, and the stories get exaggerated and twisted over time. Something that's a concept George loves to play with, the way that rumor and legend get passed down. And we're talking about passing things down a number of years that's kind of unfathomable to us as human beings in the real world, because, I mean, there are structures that exist that are older than 10 or 12,000 years on this planet, but, you know, there's not very many of them, and we know even less about those than we probably know about these things in A Song of Ice and Fire. Anyway, to bring this back to our fantasy world, like you said, there's fingerprints of this all over the world. There's the base of the high tower, there's the Sea Stone chair, there's the 5 forts, like you said, and one of the reasons we think this was a large civilization was the fact that Asshai is so huge. It's as large as King's Landing plus Volantis plus, I forget what the exact 3 cities he named were.
Old Town and another one as well, yeah.
Something huge, like it's insanely big. And you do not build a city that big unless there's a lot of people that want to live there. And it's the same with the 5 forts. They're insanely big, and it doesn't really make sense that they would make them that big and not have enough people to put in there. So it implies that this was a large civilization. Whether it's as connected as we think is debatable, but there's evidence for it all over the world. Thus, whether it was one distinct empire or just a bunch of different peoples that had shared technology and things passed from culture to culture, that would make sense as well. So whatever we call it doesn't really matter. The fact is that we want to figure out as much as we can about it, whatever shape it actually takes.
Absolutely. We had a couple of super chats coming in. Yakov Hayes, so thank you very much. Just saying no question. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Sanrixian saying, thanks for keeping me sane. Will I bust out backgrounds for Archer? The Great Emperor of the Dawn is one of my favorite topics. You guys rock. As Sanrixian, I should probably say, you you gave me a super chat a couple of weeks ago, right at the very end, and I didn't get a chance to say that. So Sanrixian is one of the excellent artists we have in this community, and I would highly recommend you go and check out her work. If one of the moderators could pop a link into the chat, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. And busting out backgrounds for Archer, is that Archer the TV show? If so, I'm hugely impressed. But anyway, so let's get back to this. So we've got this fantastic empire, which is kind of spanning the world potentially. Let's. I did have a question from one of my patrons. Let's see if I can find it about Asshai, because you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I want
let me back up just a second to fill out something while you were doing all that. I looked something up real quick, and I found the quote that I think is one of the best things to connect what you were saying, the ET, the Gemstone Emperors, to Daenerys. And like Robert said, yeah, my light back there is intended to be an homage to the different colors of the Gemstone Emperors. In this sort of Age of Heroes-ish type period that ET had, there was a series of Gemstone Emperors that each emperor, each dynasty, or each emperor or empress was associated with the gemstone, like Amethyst, or the Amethyst Empress is a particularly prominent one that has echoes of Daenerys herself. And then the Bloodstone Emperor has echoes of Euron Greyjoy. And there's lots of other patterns like this. And this is why I said maybe it's a whole dynasty. Maybe they say it's one emperor. The Pearl Emperor lived a couple hundred years. Maybe that's just his dynasty ruled for that many couple hundred years. It's not clear. Anyway, here's the quote. This is from Daenerys 9, A Game of Thrones. And to set the stage, this is when she's in her tent recovering from her ordeal. It's the right before she ordeal, meaning her pregnancy, losing Rhaego. This is right after the really epic moment where Mirri Maz Duur is in the tent with the shadows and the Blood Riders are killing each other. And so after that scene, she's having fever dreams. And one of them is, ghosts line the hallway, dressed in the faded raiment of kings. In their hands were swords of pale fire. They had hair of silver and hair of gold and hair of platinum white, and their eyes were opal and amethyst, tourmaline and jade. Faster, they cried, faster, faster. So that's awesome, right? And you see these exact same colors, these very distinct, kind of rarely mentioned gemstones like tourmaline and amethyst, but they come up very specifically with Daenerys and these ET mentions. So they don't really pair up with much else. And the hair color as well, and the swords of pale fire, which sounds like, well, we're not going to talk about that yet, but it sounds like Dawn a bit. So lots to think about there. Lightbringer, sword of pale fire. There's just so many tie-ins to this one dream. And again, pretty early in the series this happened. So George had these ideas pretty early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've made me completely forget what I was about to go on to.
Something like that.
Oh yeah, Asshai. I will come on to Asshai in just 1 second. That's absolutely fascinating. I've not really clocked that before. So what we're talking about is we've got a link between Daenerys back in book 1, who's having, let's call it a fever dream. There's other stuff going on, but that's the kind of the feel, which is clearly and explicitly linking back to the emperors and the great empire of the Dawn. Yeah. Because each of these emperors, they had a jewel associated with them. So let's see if I can try and I've got up here. There was the Pearl Emperor, there was the Tourmaline Emperor, the Jade, the Topaz, the Opal Emperor. These are the jewels that she is seeing in that vision. So there is an explicit link. We do not know exactly why. Let's be honest about this. But there is an explicit link between her, the dragons, which are to come in just a few chapters' time, a couple of chapters' time, and the great empire of the Dawn. And it's worth saying that dragons, although we don't think of dragons as appearing until the Valyrian Empire, the Valyrian Freehold, they are mentioned back in the Great Empire of the Dawn as like emperors had them as pets and things like that. That was that they did exist They didn't just suddenly magically appear when the Valyrians appeared. They did exist beyond that. So there is a chance that there's a link between Daenerys and the Valyrians up all the way back up to this great Empire of the Dawn. And I know I've been trying to keep us away from House Dayne, but I'll do the link here very quickly. A potential that there's a link also from that house all the way back up, and that is why their looks look quite similar, because there's thousands of years of genetics working their way through, but the houses are quite similar. Yeah, I'll return to where I was going to go, which was a question from one of my patrons, because you've mentioned Asshai a couple of times. The possibility that Asshai was this capital city of the great empire. Now, if I were more tech savvy at this point, I'd bring you up a wonderful map of Essos. But if you imagine the Essos, down the middle of Essos, just to sort of to the right, the east of the Dothraki Sea, you get this mountain range, the Bone Mountains, which sort of goes pretty much from the top of Essos right down to the bottom. And then all to the west of that is the bit of Essos that we know reasonable amounts about. We've got Slavers Bay, Dothraki Sea, the Free Cities, and all the rest of it. To the east of it, it's slightly cut off because, or from a sort of a Western perspective anyway, from the rest of the world. And we know slightly less about it. But that is where Yi Ti is, that is where the plains of the Yorosnai are, and that is where Asshai is. And so what you're suggesting is that Asshai might have been the capital of this empire which spanned all of that region. Now, this was Ariel Winchester who gave the super sticker earlier, so thank you, Ariel. Happy to come on to your question now, saying, what do you believe is the origin of Asshai? Is, just to tease this out a little bit more, do you take the fact that Asshai, when we hear of Asshai, that it is huge but hasn't got very many people in it at the moment, do you take that as evidence that it once was a hugely populated city? And do you think that there is a link between that and the Great Empire of the Dawn?
Okay, yeah, great question. Yeah, I think so. It doesn't make sense to me that a city would exist that's larger than it needs to be. People, like, where are these extra buildings coming from? Who is building them? Who's spending money to make buildings that are completely unnecessary? I mean, it's possible, but it just doesn't seem it just doesn't add up. Like, it makes far more sense that the city is big because a lot of people wanted to live there. Like, any large city starts off as small and then just grows. There's very few cities that are planned from the beginning to be large. There are some exceptions to that. For example, Alexandria was planned by Alexander the Great, like from the get-go, to be large and in a certain place. But that's part of the point here too. Asshai is positioned in a very interesting spot. It's at a we hear reference to the traders' circle of the Jade Sea, which is a very valuable trade route. If you look at the Jade Sea on the map, you can see that if you just by sailing sort of west and south, you can hit a bunch of major cities and then do kind of a circle back to Karth, while you pass a few of these other island nations that are pretty obscure, but apparently fairly bustling places that probably have some obscure and rich trade goods, which would explain why Asshai got so big. If it's in this important location in a region that has lots of trading going on, and they're in a prominent location, they would benefit greatly from all that. They would have lots of wealth, and that would explain how the city would be able to grow so large and have such, big walls and other edifices that are expensive, and to have such a huge port. It's still a gigantic port even now. As for explaining how it got to be so magical is a separate topic, but as people want to know how this may have related to something larger or how it got to be so big, I think the positioning is really important, but also the nation that it's part of something larger comes from the fact that it would be very, very hard for a city that size to feed itself. And even now, that's true. We know that even with it being completely depopulated, even now, there's no children there, and the local food is inedible. So they have to bring food in from outside. I very much believe this was the case in the old days too, not for the same reasons, not because local food didn't grow. That may or may not be the case, but I'm guessing they didn't build a city initially in a place where food wouldn't grow. So I'm guessing at first the city had the ability to maybe support itself, and as it got so big, like Rome eventually couldn't feed itself. Rome was shipping in huge amounts of grain from Egypt, which had the capacity to grow huge amounts of grain. So if you look at Asshai now, you can see why it's depopulated, even if we don't know exactly why, because it's surrounded by ghost grass. There's no food. There's nowhere to grow food. You can't fish the rivers. So that might explain why it's collapsed as a population center, because there's no food. You can't support a population of any kind. But then add in all this magical stuff that means children can't be born. You've got a whole nother set of reasons there probably. But even if you take that away, this stuff adds up to some sort of calamity, or some sort of it grew so large. And you could see how that would be a really vital, bustling metropolis, the food being shipped in from elsewhere, like a major city that could exist in the real world, but also government and culture and learning would all be big. This would be a hub of so many potential things, because it's a trade center, and that means ideas and goods and people from all over are going to be there, very cosmopolitan. So it's really fascinating how large and interesting this place probably could have been, and probably was, because it's so big and so well positioned and so rich. Even now, as we know, it gives gems for food. Like, it pays incredible amounts for food, but that's just, supply and demand. They have a hard time getting food there. So, and an easy time getting rich is.
Yeah. So I think we're actually on agreement on this one. I think Asshai clearly was huge. I mean, probably the largest, most impressive city on the planet at its height. And then something went wrong. What went wrong probably was some kind of connection with the Long Night that we'll get onto in just one moment, when the Great Empire of the Dawn collapsed, and we're told that everything basically went wrong, and then they had to build up a new kingdom, which was smaller inevitably. And the world's ecosystem seems to change at that point, and that meant that Asshai, although the sort of physical infrastructure was still there for a massive city, the population shrank over time. So I think that is what we're looking at with Asshai. Anime lover Nicole, thank you so much for the super chat. And it's your birthday, so happy birthday to you.
Happy name day.
I saw your question over on Patreon. We'll get to that in just one moment, but I hope you're having a fantastic day. Sanrixian confirmed that yes, she is indeed working on season 11 of Archer. So respect. I'm a big fan of Archer. Well, I watched the first 5 or 6 seasons. I haven't watched the last few seasons, but they are really excellent. Second Sons, thank you so much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to there. If there is one, if one of the moderators could pick up on it, that would be great. And Marvin Martin, picking up on the Asshai question, thank you for the super chat, saying, could Asshai magic be in their jewels sold all around the world, allowing them to manipulate Planetos? Now that's an interesting one. Now I think this is what Aziz was saying. So Asshai can't grow their own food, but they do seem to have a plentiful supply of jewelry and gemstones and all the rest of it. And so when food comes in, and people, it's quite a hard journey getting there, but it's worth it if you're going to come in with some food, because people in Asshai will give you gemstones, and then you can go away and make a massive profit. The gemstones, obviously, then, because everyone wants gemstones, work their way out across the world. And the question is whether this is some kind of Asshai magic allowing them to manipulate Planetos. My take, I'll be interested in your view in a moment, Aziz, but my take is that seems to imply that Asshai works as some kind of conglomerate, everybody working together to try and achieve a thing, them all deciding that we're going to send out these jewels which do something. I don't think that seems, from what we know of Asshai, that doesn't seem to be how they operate. Asshai seems to have lots of individual people who are doing their own strange, mystical, magical stuff. People like Melisandre, who was there, people like Quaithe, who was there, for example. They don't seem to operate as some kind of group that has a plan for Planetos. But Aziz, have you got anything to add on to that one?
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with you. I think it's a subtopic or a related topic that maybe could be raised here is the idea of the glass candles. They're not. It wouldn't be proper to call those jewels, but the idea that glass candles can be used to get into someone's head is somewhat supported. So I agree that this probably isn't some global conspiracy thing, but it is possibly an invention, a magical invention that originates from Asshai, if not Valyria, or both, that could be used to manipulate people from afar. So it could be like a smaller version of what Marvin is suggesting. I think could exist, but maybe not I agree with you that they probably weren't united in this effort.
Yeah. Absolutely. Chrissy Voldstones, thank you so much. One of my amazing moderators. Chrissy, I know, works across a huge amount of channels. So thank you, Chrissy, and thank you to all of my moderators. Chrissy picked up from the Super Sons Super Chat. Will the Danes be important in the Endgame, or is their lineage just building the world? I'm gonna, if that's okay with you, Second Sons, I'm gonna park that one. I know we will come to the House Dayne in a moment, I promise you. But let's do all of it at once rather than just sort of like picking at it through the stream. So I will take a note of that about whether they will be important in the Endgame, and we will come back to that in just one moment. Think we had one other super chat. Nina Friel.
Hey, Nina.
Thank you so much. Just giving a thumbs up to Aziz. Why not? Oh, we did have a couple more thumbs up. Excellent. And Paul Atreides, thank you for the super chat, saying happy Thursday from Tally. Is that sounds like an American Tallahassee?
I'm from Tallahassee, actually. Yes, it's the capital. It's the capital of Florida, and it's where Florida State University is. And I went to Florida State, and I went to high school there. And my mother is still a teacher at Florida State, or a professor rather.
Wow,
small world.
small world. This is asking about the most northernmost Empire of the Dawn ruin. Now, this is where we get to the expertise of the man Aziz. So just by way of background, to give him a few moments to think about this answer before I get to it, what we have in Yi as a whole is we have cities that are there that are built on the ruins of previous cities. And the further north you get, you also start to get more ruins from more recent ruins, where the Jugosnai have sort of raided and taken over places. But do you happen to know off the top of your head what the most northernmost Empire of the Dawn ruin might be?
I think it might be the Five Forts. There's, if you call that a ruin, which I guess it's fair to call that a ruin, it's not, I don't know how ruined it is, but no one uses it anymore as far as we know. I think that might be the farthest northern point. I mean, I was just kind of peering over at the map to refresh myself on what the northernmost point is. But yeah, I think that's about it. There's some evidence of civilization on the Thousand Islands north of that, but it's not there's nothing that ties it to the Great Empire. It's just some old civilization that probably isn't there anymore. The archaeology is different. It doesn't really fit. It's possible because empires are known to contain, that's kind of the point of an empire, is to have multiple types of people that maybe don't have anything to do with each other. Obviously, the Roman Empire spanned from Spain well into Asia. And of course, the people on the farthest east didn't have a whole lot in common with the people on the far west other than basic stuff, but all of them being in the Roman Empire. So this is kind of similar in that regard. It depends on what was conquered by them and what was, maybe separate. So we don't know for sure. But there's structures as far north as the farthest north point we know in Essos, which is a lot farther south than Westeros. Westeros goes a lot farther north than Essos does. Ib, there's evidence of dragons on Ib, which doesn't necessarily mean any direct connection to the Great Empire, but it does imply the possibility, and it certainly adds to the evidence that dragons existed before the Long Night, because these bones are apparently predate Valyria, as far as the World of Ice and Fire tells us. So I think that if it's not the Five Forts, it might be one of these other cultures that is still around that we don't know for sure was part of the Great Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would. I mean, I don't know any more than that. I have to say, I mean, I'm not sure that the Five Forts count as a ruin, but I think that's picking at things. To be honest, they are still used, and that is one of the wonders of them, is the fact that they have survived for thousands of years. But we will get on to the Five Forts. Marvin Martin, you've given us another hard question. Thank you so much. We love the hard questions. Some dragon colors seem less natural and more dual, like the Emperors. Coincidence or not? And what do you think is under the Asshai Corpse City? So let's go with the Asshai Corpse City. So this, I think you're talking about Stygai, I think it's called, which is this city close to Asshai, but the Shadowbinders, the people of Asshai, even they don't go there. And, you know, most people are scared to go to Asshai, but if the people in Asshai are scared to go somewhere, then that probably says a lot. Now, what we're told is that it's called the Corpse City, so there are rumors and legends of what is there. There are corpses, there are dragons, there's who knows what, and it's obviously it's a dead city. So it sees trying to pull things from my brain here as we go. I think it sees sunlight for just like an hour or a day or something. So it's dark, it's shadowy, it's in the Shadowlands. And the question is, what lies beneath it? Now, I have to admit, I've never theorized about this. Is this something that you've ever had a long think about?
Yeah, it's been a while, and I was able to use this time just now to kind of dig through my old notes here. And there's a couple of really interesting things. For one thing, that we could slightly detour to discuss the homage here, which is that Stygai is very, very much a reference to Stygia, the river Styx, which is from Greek myth. You can't, drinking from the waters is not a good idea. I think it makes you forget everything. I don't remember exactly. And it's a place of death. It's you cross it to enter the underworld, all that. It's associated with the underworld. So it's very much, that stuff is very much on theme here. As you said, it's in quote unquote the shadow, which is some mysterious magical condition west of or east of Asshai, and it sounds like a miniature long night that's still in place, as if or maybe something or it's some sort of magical volcanic thing. It has a lot in common with what we perceive to be the Doom, or at least it has a lot of elements that are familiar to that, which is just yet another thing that links these concepts. The idea, Stygai is a small city, I suppose, east of, that's how it's described, east of Asshai, and people can't go there. It's toxic, literally. And so it sounds like some sort of magical fallout happened there, which is again why it makes us think of the Doom, which is a magical fallout of sorts that's still raging even now. There's still strange things happening on Valyria, even though it exploded more than 400 years ago. And whatever happened around, east of Asshai must have happened thousands of years ago, and it's still in place. It might explain the ghost grass, which is slowly and steadily expanding. The Dothraki legend says it'll eventually cover the whole globe. And I'm guessing that's not an original Dothraki legend. It's something that they inherited from an older culture that's been around longer than them, because the Dothraki aren't a super old culture. So yeah, that's it's a really interesting and super magical, which is kind of unusual. We're used to the setting of the story being kind of lower, but gradually more magical as the series goes on. And so it's kind of makes sense that as we're getting into we're getting closer to the real long night and closer to others versus humans, that some of these topics come back up. And if we're getting into the nature of who Daenerys is and what her goal is and what her destiny is, because it's quite clear that there's magic behind it all. She's having dreams before she even gets the eggs. She's having dreams. That's something that I think a lot of people don't really remember, because it's kind of a blur if you think back to book 1. And if you have the TV show canon mixed up, it's hard to keep track of it all. But I've done a reread recently, so this is fresh for me. And it's
you do a reread every couple of months. It's not being so humble.
So I think that's really to answer the other part of the question about the dragon colors. I love that question, because I am a big believer in the idea that dragons are not entirely natural. If they were engineered, there's lots of evidence of engineered species on Planetos. The Valyrians definitely did it. We know they had so-called flesh pits where they tried to make creatures. We know from an offhand comment, maybe dropped by accident, but I got Elio once to admit that sphinxes were real in Westeros, or in Essos. Sphinxes were an engineered species created by Valyrians. So if sphinxes can be created, it's not all weird to think dragons could be. And there's evidence of that. Septon Barth, in fact, who we all know is a very accurate gentleman, posits this thing himself. He thinks maybe dragons are engineered, and you can even see how they did it. Wyverns of Sithorios, which don't breathe fire, fireworms, which live in the 14 flames, don't fly but breathe fire. Combine the two, and you've got a dragon. And so it's all there. It's all supported. There's no direct evidence, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. And so if they're making them, if they're creating dragons, then of course they could be fanciful colors. Like Sunfire, the golden, is golden with like pink wings, and that's just really, that occurs in nature without magic? I mean, maybe nature makes some pretty cool, creepy things, like deep sea creatures in the real world don't look real to me. But in a world with magic, I think it's okay to assume that magic might be a part of it. In our world, no. But
yeah. So I mean, we're covering huge amounts of ground here. I'm loving this. Is the origins of dragons as well. Dragons were there before the long night. They just never, they weren't, as far as we can tell, they weren't a part of the world sort of over in Westeros in the stories that we have, the legends we have there. And I think I would tend to agree with you that they are some sort of product of genetic manipulation, we'd probably call it these days, mixing hybrids and all the rest of it. That seems to be the hint that we've been getting. Incidentally, Disputed Lands, who I've had on here, Amanda, I've had on here a few times, has got a couple of excellent videos on this subject. I would highly recommend you go and check them out. But I'm going to try and haul this one back towards what we're sort of talking about to start with. Although, here be dragons, thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate that. Saying, can't stay, daddy-daughter time, but mad respect to two legends. That is very kind. Thank you so much. Enjoy the daddy-daughter time. It's far more important than talking about this, as important as this is.
This will be here later.
So let's talk about, we've been talking about sort of the origins of the Great Empire of the Dawn and all the rest of it now. Let's move on to this time of the Long Night, the Bloodstone Emperor.
Cool.
Now, Morley asked, what was the blood betrayal that legends say caused the Long Night? Who is the Lion of Night and the Maiden of Night? As a sort of a headline, and Aziz, I'd love your spin on this in just one moment. So as a headline, what we're told in the legends is that the Great Empire of the Dawn started off with this sort of great god emperor, and then it sort of got passed down generation to generation for a few generations. Each generation The Emperor seems to survive for less time. By the legends, they started at 1,000 years, then a few hundred, and all the rest of it, and moving on down. They got weaker. The enemies of the Empire grew stronger. And then eventually, I think it was the Pearl Emperor handed on to the Amethyst Empress. She was going to be the new leader. But the Amethyst Empress had a brother who obviously didn't like the idea of his sister being in charge. And then there was what is known as the blood betrayal. The language is a little bit vague, but basically he overthrew her. The implication is that he killed her, and then he started this great reign of terror and did all kinds of terrible things. We hear about cannibalism. We hear about necromancy. He turned away from the old gods, so to speak, and he worshipped this stone which fell from the sky. And all of this caused the Lion of Night, who was the original god here of this area. He became angry, and then he came in and caused his demons came in, and all the rest of it caused the long night, and everything was saved by this great hero with Lightbringer, Azor Ahai, and the woman with a monkey's tail, who I've got a question on. Let's talk about her in a moment. But this whole thing going on here, what's your take on this story we have here?
Okay.
And how it links across to what we know in Westeros.
Cool. I think it's very much telling us the story of what Euron's going to do. If we recall the TV show, a lot of us, when we saw what Night King was doing on TV, we thought that's either not going to happen on the show. It's a combination of not going to happen in the books, or Euron's going to do it. And so if you take what Night King did, was he took a dragon and blew up the wall, and the armies of the dead flooded Westeros. There's a lot of people out there with various theories on how the wall is going to come down, and a lot of those theories involve Euron being the one to do it, either by blowing the horn, because that horn is now at Old Town with Sam, and so Euron's about to take Old Town, so you can see how he could get his hands on it. And the other way would be if he actually succeeds in taking a dragon, which is entirely possible, and then just does what Night King did and takes down the part of the wall with it. And all these things would lead us to almost exactly what's being described with this blood betrayal event. Because think about these parallels to Euron here. You have Caster down low, proclaiming himself the Bloodstone Emperor. We know that he wants to try to marry her and make himself king. So you already have some of that fitting right here, and how she's a real claimant, where he is just a usurper. So in this story, they're related. They're brother and sister. So that clearly isn't the case, but not all the details are going to line up perfectly. There has to be some differences. Now, of course, Bloodstone makes you kind of think of Euron. That's actually kind of a slight misnomer. Bloodstone is often green and black, but whatever. It sounds red and black. And Euron is red and black. He's, that's his flag color. It's the inverted Targaryen colors. It says he practiced dark arts, torture, and necromancy, enslaved his people, took a tiger woman for his bride, cast down the true gods, and beginning a reign of terror, ushered in an age of darkness. If you unleash the others on the realm by taking down the wall, what could better describe unleashing a reign of terror or ushering in an age of darkness than something like that? We all know Euron is majorly mixed up in the dark arts and magic and getting involved in all that. So we don't have to sell anybody on that concept. And enslaved his own people. He's absolutely doing that. He cuts the tongues out of his own crew. He doesn't care about the Ironborn. They're a stepping stone to greater power. Took a tiger woman for his bride. In the show, Euron marries Cersei. It's a tiger woman, lion woman. And the reason that might happen in the books is because he would want to, it's a power thing, and he would maybe want a child with royal blood, because you can do creepy things with a royal blooded baby. And some of this is pretty tinfoil, I know, but it's all right here in this. These theories about Euron are echoed right here in this stuff about the blood betrayal. It sounds so very familiar. And given that we know George loves to set up current events with history, it just all feeds into that so nicely. So we can't get too detailed with what exactly is going to happen, but these are very strong parallels and connections. And there was one other bit I wanted to throw out there about Euron and Dany. I guess I'll probably think of that later. But in terms of the idea that Euron is casting down the gods, which we saw in that dream in the Forsaken, where he's got priests on prows. You know, he's collecting all these different priests. So casting down the gods. It says casting down the true gods in the quote, but Euron's casting down all of the gods. He's casting down the drowned god. He's casting down the Seven. He's casting down the warlocks of Karth. He's got all of them, and they're all. That's what Aeron sees in that dream. He sees the different gods impaled on the Iron Throne, with Euron with a Cthulhu face sitting on it, with a woman with hands of pale fire standing next to him. That's the exact language used. The same language, pale fire, is used. A woman with hands of pale fire. Who is a woman with hands of pale fire? Viserion. That's a female dragon, female-ish dragon that has a palish color. And if Viserion, if Euron's going to take a dragon, might as well be that one. So that would fit anyway. So that's a lot of stuff I just dropped, but you can see there's a lot to dig into there. There's a lot of connections. Whether they end up fitting or not, we'll see. But there's so many of them. It's like, really none of these things are going to fit? None of these things are going to end up connecting to each other? There's too many things that fit from this.
There are. And I love these links across to Euron. I have to say, it's certainly something I've not investigated enough. Euron clearly is a crazy character, but not just crazy. He's intent on destroying the world and then being the king of whatever rubble is left over. That's what he's about. He wants to be the god. He wants to destroy all other. I mean, his vision is so much bigger than anyone else's. It's astonishing. There are also echoes here with Jon and Daenerys and the Azor Ahai and Nissa kind of idea, because we get this, the blood betrayal appears to be, just to answer that specific question from Maura, the blood betrayal appears to be the Amethyst Empress was killed by her brother. She should have been the Empress, but he killed her and took over. That seems to be what the betrayal was. And then you get this character, the Bloodstone Emperor, who, as I say, so he kills her in the same way that we get the imagery of Azor Ahai and Nissa, one killing the other. And there are also, and this is where George R.R. Martin goes crazy, because he gets so many different little bits of kind of like imagery that move across the piece. The kind of the language, the symbolism we get about the Bloodstone Emperor is very reminiscent of what we get about the Night's King in legend, about he did terrible things, he took over, and then he married some kind of crazy woman, and a tiger woman, or this what appears to be a female other. There was animal sacrifices and all the rest of it, ushering in an area of darkness. That the language seems very similar. So George R. R. Martin does seem to be wanting us to be taking this as a legend that has implications elsewhere. Just very quickly, Disputed Lens. Amanda, hi. I spotted you in the chat just now. I was bigging you up just a moment ago, so sorry you missed that one.
Big up, but Amanda.
Exactly. So I will do it again just for your benefit. I was trying to send people over to your videos all about the blood of the dragon and what that actually means. I would highly recommend people you go and check that out. I think as we're talking about these references across from what we have here in the East, in ET or the Golden Empire or whatever it, and what happens over in Westeros, why don't we unpick this House Dayne thing? As you've got the shirt on, I've got a question from anime lover Nicole. Happy birthday again. Talking about whether the The Amethyst Empress's children could be the Danes of Starfall. We had a question. It was one of the super chats earlier that I said I wasn't going to forget, about whether the Danes will have a role in the Endgame. Aziz, you've come here very clearly wanting to talk about the link across to House Dayne. I will set the scene, and then I'm just going to say go. But the link is reasonably clear as we're talking about the Bloodstone Emperor. So the Bloodstone Emperor apparently started worshipping this stone which fell from the sky. This sounds very reminiscent of what happened over with House Dayne. They followed the stone which fell to the sky, this comet, this meteorite. They were over in the east. We've got the great empire of the Dawn. And then what do the House Dayne call their sword? Dawn. And what's the holder of the sword called? The Sword of the Morning. The links there are incredibly strong. What's going on? As I said, go. What's your theory? You've come with a t-shirt. Clearly there's a thing here that you're thinking there's a link. What's your thoughts on this?
So you're right you hit the nail on the head. I think the most important little tidbit there is of all the little things I mentioned about Euron and all the connections, the one piece of the Bloodstone Emperor mystery that I didn't have a comparison for was the black stone falling from the sky that he worshipped. Now, that is a real world thing, oddly enough. That comes from, if I can divert slightly from the question just for a second, there was a black stone that fell from the sky, a meteorite that the Emperor Elagabalus forced the Roman Empire to worship. And it was a very strange time in the Roman world because it would take this stone and move it from place to place, and people would walk backwards and everything. It's so weird. So it was this cult of the Black Stone, but it was the actual Roman Empire that was Roman Emperor leading it. So anyway, that's a good story to look up for later. But anyway, so comparing the Black Stone falling from the sky to the Dayne meteor falling from the sky, the one that they forged Dawn from, is you can't ignore that. You have to at least consider what that says, or what this parallel might indicate. And how it all, to me, another factor here that I touched on earlier is the sword itself. Dawn is probably important, right? This is really cool sword that in the early days of A Song of Ice and Fire fandom, it was the top pick for Lightbringer. People thought, keep it simple. Lightbringer, it's this glowing light sword that's just sitting there waiting for someone worthy, that's got to be Lightbringer, right? Nowadays, the fandom seems to have evolved on that. Maybe there's multiple Lightbringers. The dragons being Lightbringer is a very popular theory that I think has a lot of merit to it, and which still works, by the way, because Dany, Lightbringer, Azor Ahai, all that works. So how this is going to play into the story, that's the part that I'm kind of fooled on, because it's hard for me to perceive exactly how Starfall is going to be roped into the main story, although it seems very likely it will be, because there's non-magical mysteries that have to be dealt with there too, right? We still have to deal with Jon's parentage and Ned and the Tower of Joy. That's, take all the magic out and you still have that aspect of Starfall that we have to get into. So whatever ends up happening, there's already groundwork for us having Starfall or Edric Dayne and or Darkstar, the Sword Dawn being involved. All that groundwork is there. So knowing it's going to be part of the story, we have a sense that it will matter. George didn't invent Darkstar, didn't invent a cadet branch after the fact. He's like, we need more Danes. Let's make this house up that wasn't actually there before. That's a product of the 5-year gap, I think. And that's why Darkstar was added. I think, I see you nodding. You agree with that. It seems pretty straightforward and when you lay it out like that. But the part that maybe gets lost in the shuffle is it had to be Dayne. Or at least it seems that way. If George was going to add Darkstar in, why did it have to be a Dayne? If he's going to go through all this effort to retrofit a house that wasn't there, to make a cadet branch of the Danes, why doesn't he just make Darkstar an Uller or an Ironwood? Probably because he has a very specific reason to make him a Dayne. It's because he has his ancestry matters for the story. His purple eyes and his look, he looks like a Valyrian, even though he's explicitly not, according to George. That's got to matter somehow. And so it's the narrative framework is there for all this magical stuff to be on the outskirts or even more central to the character parts of all this. And what Dawn says to us is that, hey, this sword is like 10,000 years old. How the hell did someone make this thing back then? Like, where does this technology come from? Who could possibly do this without it implying some much greater, a civilization, maybe not quite the size of the Great Empire of the Dawn, but at least something substantial that has advanced metalworking techniques, if not magical metalworking technique, because it's like the books are very clear that Dawn is very much like Valyrian steel, except for how it looks. The weight, the sharpness, the fact that it never needs to be sharpened, all that stuff. It's Valyrian steel, except it doesn't look like Valyrian steel. It's white. It's like the white version. It's like the fire and ice. It's like the ice version of the Valyrian steel is the fire version or something like that. So there's lots of theories about Dawn that are unrelated to all this, but somehow, no matter what theory you prefer about Dawn, the fact that it's super ancient and super amazing is a big deal, because that technology just couldn't have existed unless there was some significant civilization or at least learned people that knew how to do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I buy into this completely, this idea that this was a house Dayne comes or is connected in some way across to the Great Empire of the Dawn. And I'll get on to, in just one moment, to my working tinfoil that I'm going to start pushing to people to see whether they can add to it about the Sword Dawn. But just in terms of House Dayne, I think that what we've got is the Great Empire of the Dawn, who clearly had something going on about Dawn, which is probably quite natural, as they were quite an easterly culture. We have it in it's very kind of Western centric way of looking at things, but in Japan, the land of the rising sun, being quite Eastern, that's quite a normal-ish thing. I don't think that, because it was before the Long Night, I don't think the Great Empire of the Dawn was named that way just as a reaction to the Long Night. But we get this veneration of a falling star that I think is clearly connected across with Starfall and with the House Dayne, who have this Sword Dawn, which was from the falling star. If you looked at a map of Westeros, you would find that along the south coast, you get to one estuary and you go up, and then you get an island in that estuary. That's Starfall. If you come out and then go up the next estuary and you find an island there, you come to what is now Old Town and what is known as Battle Island. And that is where the High Tower is. And that is made, the base of it at least, is made from the same kind of material, this kind of fused dark stone that we see in the Five Forts that we'll come on to in a moment. So I think that there is clearly, in my mind, some kind of link with what was going on over in the Empire, the Great Empire of the Dawn, the Bloodstone Emperor with this fallen star, all the way across to Starfall and then to Hightower. So I see a strong link across there.
I see a really good question or comment on the chat. If you don't mind, we could take a look.
No, go for it.
Sir Roland de Stark says, do you think that the story of the Bloodstone Emperor is just another telling of how the first Other was made, like the many stories of Azor Ahai, the last hero? Now, I don't know about the first Other, but the idea that the Azor Ahai Nissa story was, a man killing his wife, which you can easily see how the way that story is told can be interpreted a lot of different ways. Like, was she willing or not? Like, if she was willing, it's a glorious, wonderful sacrifice. But if he was just like, well, I got to kill you to make this sword, and she wasn't willing, then it's kind of evil or very evil. And so there's a lot of room for interpretation there. Like, is she some sort of Jesus figure that sacrificed herself for the world, or was she a victim of blood sacrifice? So if it's the latter, then this is what Sir Roland is getting at with the story of Azor Ahai actually being murder story, and just that's been spun into a sacrifice story, or a saving the world story. But if you take the Bloodstone Emperor killing his own sister, killing the Amethyst Empress, which again ties into Euron, because Euron killed his own brother. So instead of killing his own sister, it's killing his own. Well, actually, killed his own brothers, but importantly, he killed his kingly brother and took the crown. That's the one that truly matters.
And the mother of his child.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, absolutely. So it's so these comparisons to the Bloodstone Emperor really hit. So I think that's a good idea by Sir Roland de Stark there to connect, maybe see that those are two different versions of the same story. Just after 10,000 years, they've they've become a little more distinct than they originally were. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. So the stories we get of the Long Night, of Azor Ahai, the Last Hero, all of these seem to be connected, and this is, I think, George R. R. Martin just doing what we have in our own culture, which is taking an historical event that happened a long time ago, and then it gets filtered down into various legends and myths that are slightly different across the world. And the example, I think, last week, maybe the week before, I was talking about this briefly, was the story of Noah, which in our sort of Western culture, we know the story of Noah, but it also appears in Babylonian literature and in Indian literature and all the rest of it. And it's similar enough. There's a flood and some people survive on a boat, but there are differences in different cultures, and that, I think, is what seems to have been going on here. George R. R. Martin is saying that something happened, and the elements of it, the core elements are there. That there was some sort of hero or heroes who saved against some sort of others who were invading. There was definitely some kind of long night or darkness or something like that. Somebody killed somebody else, but exactly how that maps out into different legends will be slightly different in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt. Even meteor swords are historical. The first ever metal items in human history were forged iron beads that were from a meteorite, because in the Bronze Age, or even before the Bronze Age, there was no way to heat metal enough to hammer it into shapes. But if it fell from the sky and passed through the atmosphere, it was already preheated, so to speak. So if they found it as soon as it landed, or reasonably soon before it cooled off, they could form it. So there were, yeah. So even meteor swords is a real thing. Like, there are real meteor swords on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. So can I, as I kind of trailed a few moments ago, can I pitch to you what is my current, I mean, some may call it tinfoil, but I like to think of it as a sort of a theory in early stages of being sort of worked up into something that's actually reasonable, which is what happens with Dawn, the sword Dawn. Now, what we know is that the sword Dawn is currently at Starfall. It's been there. Ned took it there. It has stayed there. It doesn't automatically pass down from one generation to the next. It has to have a worthy owner. Now, a lot of people speculate, and I would agree, that Gerald Dayne Darkstar will probably take the sword Dawn. This will give him kind of echoes of Arthur Dayne, a kind of a dark version of Arthur Dayne. He will probably join up with the invasion that is happening with Aegon VI, Aegon, and become part of his Kingsguard. Again, echoing Arthur Dayne. The visuals would work really well for sort of Team Aegon. It has to be said to have the successor to Arthur Dayne there in the Kingsguard. Now that brings the sword Dawn all the way across to King's Landing. Now, for reasons that are very long and complicated, I did a video a couple of years ago saying, will Jon kill Daenerys, based purely on the visions that Dany had in the House of the Undying. I think that Jon will kill Daenerys in the books. I don't think it necessarily will happen with just a random sword or dagger or whatever Jon did it on the show. I think that the sword he will use will be Dawn, which at that point will be over in King's Landing. Now, I think this ties in with this idea that she will light one more fire. Dany doesn't light, this is House of the Undying stuff. Dany doesn't light fires herself generally. Normally her dragons do that for her. She's lit 2 fires so far. She lit the fire for Khal Drogo. She will on the show. In the books, she will in a bit, I'm sure, light the fire that destroys the sort of the Khals sort of in Vaes Dothrak. Then we're waiting for what is the 3rd fire that she will light, and I do wonder whether and this is where the tinfoil comes in. If Jon kills Daenerys as an echo of all the stuff that we've been talking about with Dawn, and in killing her when he pulls it out, then it is on fire and it becomes this echo of Lightbringer.
Oh.
So that's my tinfoil that I'm throwing out to people as my tinfoil gift to the world at the moment, and I'm waiting for people to sort of react and give me the next stage of this. What happens then? Is there any tweaks to that? What's your instant reaction to that?
Well, that's pretty cool. I like the idea. I've thought about how Dawn could get into play, and it makes sense that it would be in King's Landing, because I think Fagon will want to use the symbols of his father, even though he's probably not really his father. He's going to want to be like Rhaegar, and so if he's carrying Blackfire, which shows him as a Targaryen, that's not really a Rhaegar thing. But if he has a Dayne at his left, his right hand, especially wielding Dawn, then he'll be Rhaegar come again with Arthur Dayne as his best friend. So it'll look like that, even though that's probably Darkstar has no Arthur Dayne, but it might look like that symbolically to a lot of people around the realm, and it'd be like, this really proves that he's Rhaegar's kid. He's even got a Dayne with him. I mean, it's just like Rhaegar. Rhaegar's best friend was Arthur Dayne, blah, blah, blah. So that fits super well. As for the stabbing Daenerys, I think I kind of doubt the show just made that up entirely. Like you, I think there'll be a lot more context, a lot more build up. It'll be a lot more meaningful when it happens. But the fact that it will happen, yeah, probably. I mean, Nissa Azor Ahai, it fits pretty well with what we've already been told. And the idea that Dawn will ignite, that's the part I've thought about it igniting before under different circumstances. I once had a tinfoil theory a long time ago that would be the you know how the pattern of the prologue chapters is beyond the wall, Maester, beyond the wall, Maester, beyond the wall, Maester? Maybe the 6th book, probably not, because it's in the Riverlands. It sounds like it's going to be focused around Jane Westerling, but who knows? Maybe a Maester is traveling with them. It doesn't matter. Point being, I thought maybe the Maester at Starfall would be a wonderful prologue for book 6, and he's like sitting there chilling, and Dawn just ignites like right there while he's just chilling. So it'd be like, well, no one is aware of it, but like a couple people at Starfall and the readers. But I don't think that happen. It's just a fun idea, because we were all trying to figure out, how is this thing going to get into the story? Like, who's going to wield it and bring it out, and then how's it going to? Yeah, Jon wielding it eventually. I could see that. I could definitely see that. Even if it's just to do this monumental event. Yeah, it's really hard to say. Like, Daenerys's death in the books is it's such a tricky thing, because there's so much evidence that she doesn't want to be super destructive, but there's so much evidence that destroying things is the only way it's going to work. I mean, Slavers Bay is irredeemable. You cannot fix that place. You have to kill all the slavers and start that society all the way over. You can't fix it. You can't fix Karth, right? So if she's just like, well, I also got to destroy Westeros because it's also irredeemable. Like, that's where I'm at in my head with how this is going to roll in the books, is that she's going to look at the system of Westeros and go, no.
I think if we get into will Daenerys burn lots of cities, I think we're going on a huge digression here. I wouldn't disagree that there are 2 elements here to Daenerys's backstory. The Slavers Bay thing, yes. I think that you then move on to, well, what does she do about Volantis? And then, anyway, that's a digression.
Why Jon might have to do it. It doesn't explain why he would use Dawn, but it does explain why he might feel compelled to do it. But yeah, I like it.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we're slightly late for this one, but what I normally do roughly halfway through my live streams is I just take a moment to let people know what's happening on my channel going forward, and also to let my guests tell you what's going on their channel. So on my channel, I'm building up to the season 3 of Westworld, so I will let you know probably next week exactly how I'm going to be covering that, but I'm going to go reasonably big on that in the way that I covered season 2, so I'll be doing episode breakdowns as well as probably a live stream before each episode, so that's something to be looking forward to. What I wanted to talk about, two things. First of all, my the Traveler's Guide, which I know a lot of people enjoy. I'm almost at the end of the Traveler's Guide now, guys. Tomorrow we've got the Traveler's Guide to Yi Ti, which is why I decided to do this live stream on this topic today. And then after that, I think there's just one more, which is Asshai. So that will be the end of the Traveler's Guide after I think 90 episodes. So it's been a long old haul. What I wanted to say was that is only possible, and everything that I do on this channel is only possible because of the support of my patrons. So I just wanted to give a huge thank you to my patrons. And as part of that, I'm going to do the Traveler's Guide is all done, but I've noticed there are a couple of areas that maybe I could do a shorter little bonus Traveler's Guide on, just for my patrons as a thank you. So if you want some bonus material, bonus Traveler's Guides, then at some point over the next few weeks, I will be dropping a few of them over on my Patreon. But if you just want to support the channel, or if you want to get access to those extra things, then there's a link down in the description. That's the first thing. The second thing is my second channel, which is The Well Told Tale. For those who don't know, this is, and I partly love, partly hate the phrase, but it's my passion project. It's something that I just love doing. It's reading audiobooks, what I consider to be the finest stories of science fiction and fantasy that there are out there, and it's just me reading them. I make averaging about 3/4 of an hour per episode of just undiluted. I don't do adverts in the middle, just undiluted story.
Cool.
That's now been launched as a podcast, which is how I always intended it to be. So if you are a podcast person, please do search for The Well Told Tale. And I'm also relaunching my Patreon for that over there. I know, Aziz, you're a big podcast person. One of the big things that you can do to help sort of push the podcast so more people see it is by leaving comments. So as a sort of an introductory offer, then if you sign up before the end of March to my Well Told Tale Patreon, you get one of these shiny, lovely leather bookmarks for The Well Told Tale, and also get entered into get a special prize if you leave a comment on whoever your favorite podcast provider is, which is an amazing piece of artwork that next week I will show you, because it is absolutely fantastic. It's based on the War of the Worlds, which is one of the stories I've been reading, and this fantastic artist has managed to get the text for the War of the Worlds and teeny tiny and turned it into a picture of one of the tripods, one of the aliens from the War of the Worlds, and it's absolutely beautiful. So if you're at all interested in that, go and check out the Well Told Tale Patreon. But Aziz, what is it that's coming up with you?
All right. Well, I'm having a nice busy stream weekend. I'm on it's like a stream of streams. Yeah, that's the appropriate Song of Ice and Fire name. I'm doing with you today. Tomorrow I have my recurring Crusader Kings 2 game stream where you're playing we're playing House Blackwood Dynasty. It's really fun. We've got our current character that we're about to start with on Friday has green dreams, and that's the first character we've had in years that's had green dreams. So it's a very rare thing. So that's fun. We're building a new Blackwood kingdom in that game. That's really fun. Every Sunday we're doing our reread. We're currently on A Storm of Swords. We're just about to do Dany taking Slaver's Bay. That's really fun. It's also accompanied with what other chapters we're doing? We're doing Bran talking about the story at Harrenhal with the Reeds. which involves some supernatural stuff. It's really good. And we have a new episode on House Blackwood as well that just came out about a couple weeks ago. That's a scripted episode. And we're also doing a live stream on Saturday with Stephen Atwell from Race for the Iron Throne. That's the Nine Penny Kings Part 2. We cover the build up to the Nine Penny Kings War and who the Nine Penny Kings were and Maelys the Monstrous. Now we're going to do the actual war and aftermath, which is super interesting because the aftermath of Nine Penny Kings set the stage for the reigns of Castamere. It set the stage for Barristan's career, for Blackfish's career. It's where Baelish's dad met Hoster Tully. So it's where Septon Maribald's speech came from. I mean, it's such a huge thing. It's the event that shaped the lives of the oldest living characters in the Song of Ice and Fire. Where Robert's Rebellion was like the formative thing for the 30 and 40-year-olds. Nine Penny Kings was this formative event for like the 50 and 60-year-olds who were still around in the story. So it's really, really big and kind of underrated topic. Anyway, so that's what's up with us. We're staying very busy. We got an episode every Sunday, periodic live streams on other topics, and periodic scripted episodes every Friday game stream. So that's my summary.
Awesome. And guys, I only have people on my live stream that I would personally recommend what they do. And I gave them a big build up at the beginning, but I'll give them another build up again now. Aziz and Ashaya, the History of Westeros is the place to go if you want what it says on the tin, the History of Westeros. They are the masters, the maesters of knowledge about what has been going on all this time in the background to the Song of Ice and Fire. There is a link down in the description to their YouTube channel. It's also available as a podcast. Go to your favorite podcast provider and have a hunt for History of Westeros. You will not regret it. A pleasure. The pleasure is all mine, I assure you. Jennifer Wood, thank you so much. Very generous super chat saying you're both fascinating, knowledgeable, and entertaining. Thank you so much for making my day. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's very kind. And Carla Way as well. Thank you again so much for the super chat saying great stream. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. It's not Valentine's Day here for at least another half hour, but thank you so much. That's in Australian dollars, so I'm going to assume you're time traveling back to us here. But thank you. I really appreciate that. Let's get back to some questions about the Great Emperor of the Dawn, UT, and all the rest of it. I kind of parked it a little bit earlier, but the question about the woman with the monkey's tail.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is one of those things where it seems like a throwaway comment, but then you think about it and you go, oh, does that mean something more? So what we're told, the legends here are that the long night was ended by a great warrior with Lightbringer, the fiery sword. This is where legends of Azor Ahai come from, but also from the actions of a woman with a monkey's tail, full stop. Then we go on to hear about something else, and that's the kind of like, wait, what? Who was the woman with the monkey's tail? What might her actions have been, and does this make any difference to anything, Aziz?
Yeah, I think so, because there are references to this. She sees monkey-tailed hats at Base Dothrak from traders who come from farther east. But I think the real connection is, considering we are already on the track of how much this relates to Daenerys, well, a certain character who is associated with Daenerys and may be her hand of the queen in short order was rumored to be born with the tail. And what was he called repeatedly during a clash of kings by the commoners? A twisted little monkey demon. So again, to repeat myself, Tyrion supposedly had a tail when he was born and they cut it off. He didn't, but that's what the rumor is. And so you can see, if Tyrion is hand to Daenerys, then a woman with a monkey's tail is Daenerys with Tyrion. And I think that fits really well. And I got nothing else that even comes close to fitting. So if it's not that, then it might be something that we just haven't figured out, or it's something we don't have all the details for. But right now, that's where my head's at, because it fits pretty well. And it's interesting how early that was set up. This monkey's tail reference is, I mean, that's the idea that Tyrion was born with a tail is set up in book 1, and this twisted little monkey demon comment comes out when he's Hand of the King, which is Clash of Kings. So that's very early groundwork. So again, it supports the idea that George was not developed all of this in advance, but the seeds were there. Like his intent to flesh this out more eventually was there from the beginning, just like it was with Bloodraven. I mean, the three-eyed crow is talking to Bran in his dreams in chapter 3, Bran, but George hadn't come up with the name Bloodraven or his full backstory by that point. So a similar kind of idea here, I think. That's just being fleshed out more.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. So this is one of those things where George R.R. Martin does legends as a kind of like an echo, a past echo, if that works. Foreshadowing is a word that I think we overuse, but it's like something that will be repeated in the future in a not literal way, but in a way that makes you go, oh yeah, so that's linked across to that. So in terms of the monkey's tail, yes. So people in YT even now seem to wear hats with monkey tails on them as a kind of a nod to this, which, and for that tradition to have survived for thousands of years, seems to imply that whatever this woman with a monkey's tail did, it was important.
Yeah, she is all remembered and honored. Yeah,
exactly. The only real link across we have, I think you're right, is this idea of Tyrion, and also Targaryens and Valyrians generally, rumors of them being born with tails and things like that. So yeah, the most obvious implication is that this is some kind of foreshadowing that Tyrion will play an important role in what is going to happen in the rest of the story, which on one level is duh, of course he is, but also, as you say, it shows that George R.R. Martin has thought about these things from the very beginning of the story as well.
Yeah, and one other thing, if I could say real quick too,
yeah,
style-wise, I think if you want to try to like flesh out how you perceive these historical, like I like to call it historical foreshadowing. If you think of it in terms of prophecy, like how prophecies are often not quite there, they get us in the right direction, but the language is vague, or in Melisandre's case, she misinterprets part of it. That's, I think it's the
all
same
of it. Yeah.
General style that we're getting, like monkeys. We're getting like we're getting specific details that are very specific that only link to a few other things in the text, but there's not quite enough for us to make a conclusion, which that's where Melisandre goes too far. She takes these incomplete things and makes a conclusion, which is probably not appropriate to do. But hey, there's no consequences for us doing that, so we can so yeah, so I think that's a good way to kind of envision it. Think of it as prophecy, but in reverse. You know, it's like it's from the past instead of looking forward. But if you were in the past and you were seeing prophecies of the future, you might see like echoes of what Asshai would look like in the future. If I see this place being cast into darkness, you know, and you wouldn't have all the details, but you would know that it's like something to do with no children, like all the babies are dead or something like that, you know, and that's a metaphor, like a visual metaphor for no children in Asshai. I don't know. I'm really going off here, but it's neat to think about George's writing style as part of all this. It's a big picture.
Yeah, I agreed. It's a very big picture, and George R.R. Martin has left it open for interpretation. And as I've said many times for many years, particularly in relation to Azor Ahai, even when the books are finished, we will still be debating who Azor Ahai was. And that applies just as well to pretty much all of these other things. Even when the books are finished, we will still be debating whether or not the woman with the monkey's tail was relating to Tyrion or some other thing. Who was Nissa, if anyone, in the current story. These things we will still be debating because George R.R. Martin will give us a number of different options and things for us to be discussing. It's not like The Lord of the Rings, where prophecy is very much about one person, and you know that's about one person, and then it plays out and that's it. this is a much broader but fuzzier world that George R. R. Martin is.
Well said. Yeah.
Ariel Winchester, thank you so much, saying, hey, Robert, there are theories that the Bloodstone Emperor killing the Amethyst Princess started a different long night. What are your thoughts? Now, I don't know whether, when you're saying a different long night, whether there might have been more than one. That's an interesting thought.
Well, there's different, like you said, with the flood myths, right? Like it's kind of the similar concept, but whether all those floods refer to one flood or separate floods, it seems one flood seems more likely, but maybe not. Maybe this is I think maybe where she's going with this comment.
Yes, and I think so it seems most likely that we're looking at just one event that prompted lots of different stories, rather than all the different stories are focused on different events, if that makes sense. The thing that kind of connects them at a very high level seems to be, we get this comet which appeared, which the Bloodstone Emperor was worshipping, that also that seems to prefigure in some way the long night in these legends, and also obviously we get a red comet which sort of prefigures what seems to be like the start of a potential another long night in the sort of the main story. So that seems to be the link that's going on there. We don't get any hint that there were more than one long night in Westeros. It seems to be that there was just one that was carrying on. Maybe it's a little bit, I mean, it definitely is a bit fuzzy, but we didn't, there's no hint that the others kept on coming and kept on being pushed back. It seems to have been a one-time thing, and then the defenses get set up like the wall. So, I mean, do you think that there's a chance that there was more than one long night, or do you think it's reasonably clear it's just the one?
I think there's a chance, but I do lean towards the one, but it's certainly not out of the question. There's multiple, because almost every culture has their own version of the long night, and they all seem to have a hero that helped end it. And to me, that's just everyone has someone they credit for helping end it, whether or not that person deserves credit or not. But it could be evidence that there were these miniature, microcosm type versions where different individuals solve the problem somehow. But yeah, I don't think that's the case, but I do think it's not something you can just be like, nah, it's not possible. So I think it's supported, but I prefer the single one personally.
Yeah, same here. Okay, let's move this one on to the Five Forts. Okay. Now, again, this is one of those things where we don't have huge amounts of direct knowledge. None of to the best of my knowledge, at least, none of the characters whose points of view we have ever been there, so it's just sort of second or third hand knowledge we ever get about them. However, they are undoubtedly impressive. They are the northeast of what is now Yi. There's a mountain range and a huge lake, and in the gap between the two, the far side of which is the Grey Waste. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it doesn't seem like a nice place. There are these 5 forts, clearly some kind of defensive structure, clearly, in my mind at least, some kind of nod to the Great Wall of China. Yi is sort of broadly based on a sort of Chinese culture, and in the same way that the wall in Westeros is inspiration from Hadrian's Wall, this, to me, seems to be inspiration from the Great Wall of China. And these 5 forts are, as we've said, they were made from this kind of fused black stone that we see in a few other places across the world, and they are massive. They are, I think they were 1,000 feet tall, which is like 1.5 times the height of the wall, if you can imagine that. And they can each hold, I think it's something like 5,000 soldiers. They're huge constructs, and they've been there for millennia. The legend is that the Pearl Emperor built them. So this is the great empire of the Dawn. Before the whole long night business, this was the Pearl Emperor built them. So everyone speculates about why they might be built, what they are, and all the rest of it. I'll throw it to you, Aziz, first. What are they, in your view? Why were they built?
Well, I think they're thematically, they appear to be some sort of parallel to the Wall. I mean, they're on the extreme opposite end of the known world, and they are positioned in front of some wasteland where mysterious creatures live, some sort of shrikes apparently, or the armies of, or the demons of the Lion of Night are alleged to be coming from that direction. And so it's a similar concept to the Wall, which gives rise to all sorts of theories of in the long night. Other beings besides the others arose around from different places and did their thing, wreaked havoc, or did evil things, or just wrought great destruction. And the way they're built, the material they're built from, is part of the big connection here. They are made from what we call fused stone, or what George calls fused stone. And it sounds like what Dragonstone is made of. The design is different, like the architecture is different, but the building material sounds exactly or similar, exactly the same, if not, or very similar, if not exactly the same. And it's very distinct because of that. It seems like it's sort of I don't know. It's almost like you said, the roads, the Valyrian roads have some things in common with the roads in YT, and it might be a similar technology. So we have so many examples of similar but not quite the same technology. Essos versus Essos versus Westeros. We have the Wall versus the Five Forts. We have Dawn the sword versus Valyrian steel. We have Valyrian roads versus the Ytish roads. We have Amethyst eyes, Amethyst emperors, Amethyst empress. We have Daenerys with amethyst eyes of her own. And quite frankly, there's a few other houses whose eye color in Westeros is unusually persistent, like the Lannister green and the Baratheon blue, but that's a whole nother story. So the architecture, again, it's like, again, why I like to call this fantasy archaeology, because it's the building material that tells us so much, apart from the thematics of it being like this firewall type thing, the wall of ice. This is kind of like the fire version of that. Whether, excuse me, I kind of doubt it's going to play a big role in the story, because it's kind of unfathomable that anyone would go there. It's so far away from anything that seems relevant, especially now that Dany's not even going to go to Asshai, according to George. So if she's not even going to go to Asshai, I don't see how anyone's going to go to the Five Forts. But it could be brought up, just like Asshai could be in Melisandre's POV as a memory. We could have it coming up in the Citadel. Sam's at the Citadel. He could find a book on the Five Forts, and it could explain something that's relevant to us readers. Sam being in Old Town just unlocks so many possibilities. Like, George could just do whatever he wants with, like, oh, look, this old book that says this. He can reveal whatever. Like that's what they did in the show. Like, Ragger, and let's put that in a book, and that's how we go. So there's a lot of room for that. Now that we have a character in the most important library of resource written resources there. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that George made it to be really cool and to be thematically in kind of a parallel to the Wall. But I'm a little dubious that it's going to be directly important, but I think that its existence will be referenced as part of the greater mystery in terms of the Long Night.
Yeah, and I think just before getting onto the Five Forts, I think there's a bigger point there, which is about all of the things we've been talking about with the Five Forts and the Bloodstone Emperor and the Great Empire of the Dawn and all the rest of it. These things are not going to have direct relevance to the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, in as much as people aren't going to go there. We're not going to actually see these things firsthand. The role of all of this is to sort of give us hints and clues about what will happen in the real story that we're being told. So there are echoes across from one thing to another thing. We get the echo across from the story of the Bloodstone Emperor to the stories of, you know, Azor Ahai and the stories of the last hero and all the rest of it. There are echoes across from the Five Forts to the Wall, and we're supposed to draw these links and to draw some conclusions about what this might mean for the story. So I think these things are fascinating because we're not told huge amounts about them. If we're honest, the amount of facts we're told about this entire huge and magnificent civilization and culture, we could probably fit them onto a page or two. It's the implications of those facts that are the things that we're speculating about, and those are massive. So let's take the question. I saw a couple of people asking it in the chat. Were the Five Forts supposed to be keeping things in or out? What's the actual purpose of these forts? Now, the kind of the twist on this that I'm going to put is that these, according to the legends that are there, according to the legends we get passed down into Yi, these Five Forts were built before the Long Night. So it's not an exact replica of what we're told in the West, in Westeros, with the Wall, where it's kind of like that was built as a follow-up to the Long Night as a defensive structure. So it seems to be slightly different. What do you think it was actually built for?
Well, I think that it probably, well, for backing up just a little bit, I think the fact that east of the Five Forts is kind of unknown, except for there's some sort of land of the Shrikes, and supposedly the Lion of Night's demons came from this direction. So it sounds like they're trying to keep that out. Also, I would suggest that given how extremely far away the forts are from any sort of large civilization, and considering there's like a lot of wasteland west of it, and it's called the Dry Deep, or there's an area called the Dry Deep, and I would speculate that used to be a more populous area, and that the ecology of the area was different, and that it supported a greater population, because otherwise these forts are just so remote to any sort of civilization, it seems kind of odd. Anyway, so yeah, I do think they were meant to keep things out, and it could be a similar thing. Maybe they had been dealing with this problem for a long time, these invasions, whatever they were, whether they're human or not, and so they decided to defend this border. Or it could be the product of magic, in that they foresaw this. In a realm like Yi at its peak, or if we think of something like Valyria, which was full of magic and full of prophecy, they had all sorts of magical powers and abilities that we can't really speak to directly, but we can assume that they were stronger at some of these things. They would have more curriculum around magic if it was more normal, and there might even be like academic things like that. So they might have been able to study some of these things. So what I'm getting at is maybe there were prophecies of something coming from the east that they addressed ahead of time. You know, the Pearl Emperor may have had these forts built because of visions of the future, kind of like how so many Targaryens have had visions of dragons coming again, right? Like that idea is supported of recurring dreams within a bloodline that all kind of point to the same thing. Maybe the Pearl Emperor finally took action on this. But of course, the thing is, these Five Forts couldn't have been built in one generation. These are like Harrenhal wall type things. It would have taken generations to finish them, I think. So there's that to consider as well, that if the Pearl Emperor did it, then either he really was the kind of person that could live for 100 years or 200 years, as the legends suggest, or he started them and his descendants finished them, or he's the one that finished them. He gets the credit for it because they were like opened on under his watch. A lot of possibilities there, but like you say, it's pretty hard to pin down. But we can throw a lot of fun ideas out there, and some of them sound better than others. And
yeah, and there's a possibility that this is hinting to us that the wall was also built as a preventative measure. Now, there's a theory out there. Actually, I don't know where you stand on this theory, Aziz, but there is a theory out there that actually the wall was built and the Night's Watch was set up as a kind of a preventative measure against the others, who everyone knew was up there somewhere. And then the 13th Lord Commander, the Night's King, that was when the Long Night actually happened. So things had been set up first and then the Long Night happened, rather than the Long Night and then things were set up in response, to try and prevent it from happening again. So, I mean, where are you at, incidentally, just on that theory? Do you think the Long Night happened and then they built the wall, or do you think they built the wall and then the Long Night happened?
I think they built the wall and then the Long Night happened because of what you say. That the Lord Commander story is really important, especially because it sounds so much like Jon. If we take what the show gave us, that he is a Lord Commander that turned into a king. The Night's King story in the book sounds more like a king who took over the Watch, or a Lord Commander who declared himself king at the Wall, which is obviously not the same as Jon leaving the Watch and then becoming king. But if there was a debate, a full philosophical debate over whether Jon was allowed to leave the Watch, if the technicality that, hey, I died, I'm not, my watch is ended. If that that's something, the story could be passed down like, oh, he broke his oath. He shouldn't have been allowed to leave the Watch. So you could see why people would call him the Night King, because he was the king of the Wall during the Long Night, not because he's this Night's King like the TV show where he's the leader of the others. So yeah, and so that's support, like you say, that's something that lines up nicely. If we envision the Wall coming first, before the Long Night, it lines up with this theory, with this thing about the Five Forts, that the Five Forts were built in advance of a calamity, and that just tightens the parallel even more. And we know that if the children made the others, which I think is extremely likely, then that gives us an even more reason for why this could be built in advance. If the children were like, this was not what we intended when we built these others, they got out of hand. So yeah, you might need to do something about that, protect yourselves, and that would explain why the giants helped Brandon the Builder, things like that. I don't know. I mean, that the children would have, regretted unleashing this on the world. I'm not sure, but given the children are now helping humanity, they're the ones saying, "Here, take these dragon glass. This is their kryptonite." It sounds like if they made them and now they're helping people destroy them, they don't feel so good about having done that in the first place. And of course, we shouldn't assume the children are monolithic people. It might have been some of them were like, "Yeah, let's make others and kill all the humans," and other children were like, "We're not down for that. We don't want to slaughter all the humans. Let's try a different solution." But anyway, that's getting a little far off topic, but I think it all relates to a lot of these different theories.
Yes, and in terms of what we've been talking about, if we're saying that there was, back in those times, there was a connection between Westeros and Essos with this great empire, that we have connections across to Starfall and to Old Town, all the way across to what is now Yi Ti. That makes sense that they go, okay, well, hang on a moment. Where do we need these defensive structures? We've got the wall, and then this other defensive structure, 5 forts up here, defending against the Grey Waste. Now, Megasandra on Patreon says, could you share your thoughts on whether or not the Grey Waste is or has been connected to the lands of Always Winter? And the 5 forts being the Essos version of the wall. I think that this is we don't know is the short answer, because we haven't seen the map, the other side, and that's the simple truth. But this is my working hypothesis. I suspect a lot of other people share it, that the Grey Waste, which is this kind of like desert-like place, the far side of the five forts, that does connect up all the way up and around to whatever equivalent of the North Pole there is. And so, yes, there was a way down, and so this would be what the Yetish or the people in the Great Empire of the Dawn would have thought. Oh, hang on a moment, they can come down not just through Westeros, but they can also come down this way as well. What do you think on that one? Do you think that there is another way down from wherever the land of always winter, or wherever the others call home?
I'm a little skeptical of that, but it certainly can't be ruled out. The idea that those continents could connect through like a North Pole, it's certainly possible. But it seems odd that the others, the description of what's coming from attacking the five forts doesn't sound at all like the others, and it doesn't sound like they would be very comfortable in a deserted wasteland like that. They seem, and maybe it is really cold up there. We don't know. Like I'm assuming it looks desertish, but deserts can be really, really, really cold, especially at night. So that's not out of the question. It's not exactly what we picture when we think of the others, though. You know what I mean? Like the surroundings where they seem to be at home. And if the others are creations of the children, then I don't know why they would be over there at all. Because it's Westeros, it's the humans coming to Westeros that is the big abomination for them. Is that humans stole their land. I don't think they would care about attacking elsewhere, but we've already discussed the possibility that the others were not entirely what the children intended. They got out of hand. So who knows what that means? That could lead to all sorts of, they went west. They decided, let's see what's over here. We're the others. Let's go. We're conquering destructive evil forces. Let's explore our other avenues of possible destruction. But on the other hand, we also have this, this vast ocean that supposedly let Alice, I want to call her by her pseudonym, Alice Westhill, not her. I'm spacing out. The explorer with the dragon egg.
And now you. Now you ask me, my mind's gone blank as well.
Sun Chaser, Alyssa Farman, yes. Okay.
Alyssa Farman, yes.
So he saw all that exploring, and then Torrin and the Stark that sailed west also. Yeah, it sounds like that's some very, very big, vast ocean. But again, it doesn't rule out the possibility of like a North Pole kind of connecting them somehow. A lot of possibilities. There's room for a lot of creativity there.
Yeah. And I think, again, this is one of the things we don't know. And in the story, we're not going to focus on what happens over on the Far East. It's possible that we will get some kind of there are things happening. That we'll already get the hints with like the ghost grass and all the rest of it, that something's going on in the Far East. But we're not going to be told exactly what's going on there. Just a few rumors. So I think. I personally like the theory that there is another way down, or they feared that there might have been another way down, and that's why they built those things. But I don't think we're ever going to know for certain. Guys, we're starting to come to the end of my questions now. We've run out of questions for my patrons on this specific topic. I've got another couple of questions that Aziz and I will quickly go through. But now is the time to drop other questions into the chat if you've got some more about what we've been talking about the five forts, about the Great Emperor of the Dawn, Bloodstone Emperor, or anything like that. Now's a good time to drop the questions in the chat. I've got one which I would love to hear your thought with all of your Valar rereaders, from Fedra the Beloved, who's saying, the Dance of the Dragons was the name given to the Targaryen Civil War. Why is the fifth book of the series called A Dance with Dragons? There's no Targaryens fighting each other in that one. So what's going on? What's the reason for that book being called A Dance with Dragons?
Well, I think George's plotting got a little ahead of him. I think it more refers to the coming conflict between Dany and young Griff / Fagon / Aegon VI. That's the dance that is at least set up in that book. It certainly starts to get rolling, but the book got larger than George expected, and I think the the plotting of that got a little. So maybe that title might apply better to things that are coming later. But it is at least set up. Plus, Dany does fly off on Drogon and develops a tighter relationship with her dragons. Plus, we have the setup for the dragons in Meereen and killing of Quentyn and things like that. But no, I can understand why some people don't think that title isn't quite on. But honestly, none of the titles are really. They're all vague because there's so many different things. There's no title that would really encapsulate everything in that book because it's such a diverse, large book with many different plot lines. So, yeah, it's. I've wondered about that too, but I think that's the best we can get, best we can answer there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I mean, I don't like saying that this was George getting ahead of himself and naming it after something that hasn't happened yet. That seems like the most likely solution, but I don't like it. I think it's. I mean, in a kind of like figurative way, a Dance with Dragons. There are some dragons there, and one of the key themes of that is Daenerys working out who she is, and these balancing forces of, is she going to be staying over there in Meereen? Is she going to be a fire and bloody kind of Targaryen? And that is a sort of a dance as to work out where she is as a person, until at the very end of it, she's broken free from that and then finally can start being the Targaryen that certainly Quaithe seems to want her to be. So that's another way of looking at it. There is a sort of a dance with dragons going on there, and people not quite sure what to do with the dragons. Do you go in there with a whip and try and tame them? That doesn't seem to be a very good idea. Do you lock them up? Again, that doesn't seem to be a good idea. Do you set them free? Again, that doesn't seem to be a good idea. What on earth are you going to do with dragons? So that does seem to be a theme there. But I would agree, that doesn't encapsulate everything that's going on. It's just one part of that story. Great question in the chat coming up. Plexi Bertrand saying, and I think you asked this one a little bit earlier as well, saying the show never used dragons for material fabrication, fortifications or swords. Do you think Book Dany will use dragons to make swords or fortifications or armor? So this is this is basically saying, so in the sort of the background, the lore of what dragons have been used for by the Valyrians, we find that they're used for all sorts of things. Dragonfire helped make the dragon roads. It seems to have helped forge the pardon me, what was going on with Dragonstone, so making buildings. The Iron Throne was created using Dragonfire. A million one other things seem to be made with Dragonfire, but Dany hasn't done any of that. Do you think that there's anything obvious that she will do with Dragonfire other than just burning things?
I think that's a good idea. I've considered that before. I think we even discussed it in one of the Great Empire episodes or related episodes because of the diffused black stone. It seems kind of weird that they would make long roads like that and not have dragons involved, although it also seems a little strange that you just have a dragon there just like sitting there making roads. But if they're not at war and you got like 300, 500 dragons, it's a pretty good use for them, I suppose. And Dragonfire is hotter than anything but the fires of the earth, supposedly, and no one can really harness those. So it's basically a controllable extreme heat that, yeah, if they're going to try to manufacture dragon glass into weapons to fight the others, why not mix in whatever Valyrian steel they can find too, and maybe reforge some, and maybe take Valyrian steel links, daggers, things like that, and make more feasible weapons out of that. So yeah, I could definitely see that. The problem is no one knows. We don't know that people know how to make it. Tobho Mott, the smith, said, yeah, we can rework it. But I know, like, he's from Qohor, the city that best knows the secrets of Valyrian steel, apparently. And he has indicated he doesn't know how to make it. He only knows how to remake it, which is exactly what we're talking about, taking links of Valyrian steel, taking daggers and making them into something bigger. So yeah, it's definitely supported as a possibility. Nothing directly points, there's no direct foreshadowing that I know of that says, yeah, it's going to happen, but it makes sense that it could happen. And I could definitely, it would fit with so many things, like preparing for a great conflict with the others.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing to point out, though, is that Dany hasn't come to having dragons with this great depth of understanding about how to use dragons. Yes, she had some kind of teaching from Viserys, taught her a few stories, but she didn't grow up in a culture where everybody was using dragons and could therefore say, oh, well, this is what you have to do. Nor has she got huge amounts of books at her disposal about how to do these things. You see, actually, I think it was in her last chapter in A Dance with Dragons when she's thinking, oh, so Drogon keeps on going off all over the place and I can't control him. The old Valyrians, they used to have like horns and things to control dragons, and you can almost have her thinking, and obviously there's a link across to, oh, hang on, a horn that can control dragons. There's a link there somewhere, but it's clearly that the case that she is thinking, I don't know how to do this dragon riding thing. It's just pure instinct. It's her doing what seems to be natural, but she hasn't been given that huge weight of knowledge about how to do all the things with dragons yet.
But there's dreams. She's having dreams that kind of try to push her in a certain direction towards it. They're not specific, but yeah, it's like her ancestry, it's like her blood is like helping. I think it's part of that intuition, is what I'm saying. Maybe there's magic behind it.
Exactly, and there's a maester on the way who may well be able to help her as well. So there are hints here that she will learn a few more things, but thus far she hasn't had that kind of teaching.
Isn't it strange that the Targaryens themselves didn't bring any of those tools when they moved from Valyria? They just, apparently they didn't need a dragon horn. They didn't bring one, as far as we know. So I've always been curious about that. Just like some houses had them, but not the Targaryen. Maybe they were, because they were already bonded to their dragon. If it's a thing that bonds you to a dragon, the Targaryens wouldn't need that because they've already bonded. But anyway, that's another topic.
Well, this is digression. It seems to me, at least, that the way that she is thinking about it was that they had horns to control dragons, which seems to be a different thing to bonding.
Yeah.
Now, so she seems to have bonded with Drogon with no problems whatsoever, but that doesn't mean that she can always control everything that he does. Maybe if she had some kind of dragon controlling horn, then she could make him take her wherever she wanted him to go. That level of nuance, however, seems to be lost on Euron, and particularly Victarion. Most levels of nuance seem to be lost on Victarion, it has to be said. But there is a lack of understanding about how these things work, but it does seem to be a difference between bonding, which seems to be a lot more to do with what we would consider to be animal bonding, actually like creating a link between a person and the dragon and a creature, and actually making them do what you want to do, even when if you've I'm not a horse person, but as I understand it, even when you have broken a horse, you still need to be able to control them in some way with the bridle or with spurs or whatever it is. And it's not just you're just there naturally guiding it. The bond and control are slightly different things. Joe Magician is in the chat, and I see there was a question of when he is going to be next back here. Whenever Matt wants to be on, Matt, just let me know when you're free. It's always a delight. We have one more question from my patrons, and then perhaps we'll just try and pick up a last one or two from the chat. Helen's little sister, this is quite a high-level question. Helen's little sister saying, I'm curious to know what you and Aziz think about the connective narrative from the beginning to the end of George R.R. Martin's story. If you pulled one or two threads that link the dawn of the storyline characters to the conclusion, what would those elements be? As I say, this is quite a high-level question, which I'd love to hear. As I say, Aziz reads his way all the way through the books about once every week, as far as I can tell. There clearly is, we've said it many times, there clearly is a link across this Robert Frost poem with sort of like fire and ice, and there are two forces that could destroy the world, and they're actually interchangeable in a way, and what you need is the balance in and both of them to be pushed back in some way. So there's clearly that. There's another one, if you look at the beginning and the end of the story, I think, I mean, I've got a sort of a theory video somewhere which I can work through this, but the first proper chapter of the book is Bran. And as Aziz was saying, you get lots of sort of imagery there. If you look at that about him being a king, I think we will see at the end that is where he will be king. So we will get his story arc will be the one which will sort of be the overarching story arc across the whole thing. And also that sort of tied in with who's manipulating behind the scenes, because I would argue that you can see Bloodhaven / the Weirwood Network operating even in that first chapter. Bran hears things whispering in the wind, even in that first chapter, drawing them to those dire wolf pups. But what would you say in terms of sort of overarching sort of narrative or themes or threads? What do you see running through this whole story?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Certainly the highest level sweeping question we've had. I guess the themes are a big part of it. Like you said, the song of ice and fire, the ice and the fire, and how that's so prominent very early, and how it will probably be prominent in the end, even going past the ending. We get little echoes of it even from the TV show, with there still being a dragon loose in the world, and little things like that might still be out there. But yeah, I think thematically, because the Great Empire of the Dawn contains so many core elements that relate to core characters. Like, so much of what we talked about today is, Daenerys is related. We've referenced Daenerys almost every other little question here, and obviously she's a central character, about as central as it gets. So given that so much of this ties to her, and that so much of it is going to tie to, I guess Jon is probably the other character that's come up the most. Also, we've talked about Danes, and Tyrion has come up a bit. So I think the fact that these historical mysteries, stories, have such very strong connections to such central characters, and it relates directly to the core mysteries surrounding those characters and their final ending points. I mean, we've got the Bloodstone Emperor, we've got Nyssa and Azor Ahai, and the death of one killing the other, and that's just sounds so much like Jon and Dany. So I don't know if this is the kind of answer they were looking for, but yeah, I think that's another. I'm glad it was asked, because it gives us another reason to show how this story, this Great Empire of the Dawn story, and all these related sub-stories are very much Ice and Fire Endgame type stories. And that's so very on point. And as we've done, I hope during this episode, we've linked it with things from the very beginning of the story to show where those connection points are, and to show that those elements have been there since the beginning, that they've always been part of George's intent for this whole story, even when it was only a trilogy. So yeah, he's just added to that as he's gone. Well, like everything, he's added to the whole thing since he's gone on.
Absolutely. And Mod Mary 1, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, as we discuss magic, dragons, swords, let us remember that George R.R. Martin considers this all set dressing. The human heart in conflict with itself is the story. Yeah, this is one of the key themes that comes out from this, is that all of these things, the prophecies, magic, and all the rest of it, they matter not other than the way that people react to them. That is what drives the story. It's not the legends, the histories, the prophecies, or anything like that. It is how humans react. And this is a very, although it gets to be quite a high fantasy story, this is quite a low fantasy story in the sense this is about people. It's not focused in on the magic. This is actually about people. And that is why it is written very much, everything we get is written from somebody's perspective. The chapters are all from someone's point of view. Dunk and Egg is always written from Dunk's perspective. Even the history books are written from the perspective of certain maesters. These are people's perspectives. This isn't some kind of overarching objective truth story that we're being told. This is about people and how they react to the world around them. And I think with that, I'm going to wrap up this live stream. Aziz, do you want to just...
Sorry, go on. Someone named Danelle People says you missed his super chat. Maybe we could take care of that.
Did I? I'm sorry, Danelle. Let me see if I can try and find it.
I'll say one other thing related to what you just said while you're searching.
Go for it.
I'm super looking forward to the long night because of what you just said. The characters all have to deal with this world. It's these human stories told in a fantasy world. The fantasy elements are something they have to interact with, and it just impacts the conflict that they're dealing with. But the long night is going to be... It's going to be a uniting event, even though it's so destructive, because it's going to be the only time, besides maybe when everyone's looking at the comet, when all the POVs are dealing with the same thing, right? Like Arya and Dany, beginning of the story, there's nothing related to them at all, really. Like, you can hardly see how these stories would ever intersect. You can imagine it because George is a creative guy. Like, well, eventually these guys will interact. But from the very beginning, we know these things all link together as far as perspective. And it's something unusual in a fantasy setting because there's no technology to unite people. So the fact that everyone's going to be dealing with this global event at once, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this conflict resolves and how Victarion deals. Well, Victarion will probably be dead, but how someone like, I don't know, Arianne Martell deals with it versus someone like Arya versus Bran versus Daenerys versus Jon versus Tyrion. Like, everyone's going to deal with it differently, and that's fascinating to me because it'll be the same thing they're all dealing with in different ways, which we have not seen in this series at all.
Great. I have found this the super chat. Donald, apologies, I missed that as it was going through. And thank you very much. Saying this discussion reminds me why I was disappointed that Blood Moon wasn't picked up. I was looking forward to having some questions about the histories answered. Great stream, you two. Yeah, I was also a little bit disappointed about that. I mean, there were lots of rumors as to exactly why it wasn't picked up. I mean, I have my own theories. So I'm not going to go into all of that now, but I was personally disappointed that we weren't going to see the truth of what happened long ago. I really looking forward to the spin-off that we are going to get about the sort of the Dance of the Dragons and all the rest of it. But yeah, I would agree with you that actually getting something that George R.R. Martin has had an input into that gives us a first-hand insight into what was happening back there in the Age of Heroes would have been absolutely fascinating. I don't think necessarily we would have found out everything that happened over on the far side of the world that we've been talking about here, but we definitely would have found out a little bit more about what was going on in Westeros at that time.
It would have been nice. Someone other than George writing it it's real iffy having someone else come up with all that stuff. You know, that's the part that made me nervous. So I see where they're coming from though, because if it had been done well, it would have been incredible. But there's more risk with Blood Moon than with House of the Dragon.
Yeah, and I think that fundamentally is why they made the decisions that they did, was that Blood Moon was going to be a very risky project that might have been brilliant, and it might not have been. But the House of the Dragon, Targaryens, dragons, they've got the story there already. They're not going to go off piste on it. It's an easy decision to go for that. And I think after what happened in season 8, I think that they were in the mood for making easy decisions. Lily Mellon, thank you so much for the super chat. No question, just listening intently. Thanks for a great stream again. I'm saving up the well-told tale as a treat in spare time. Keep up the great work. Fantastic. Well, there are quite a few in the well-told tale now available both on the channel and also as a podcast. Love getting the plug in at the very end there. Okay, guys, I'm going to round up now. Aziz, do you want to just remind people where they can find you on the internet?
Yes, absolutely. First off, thanks so much for having me. It's really fun to revisit this topic because we've learned we've thought about things differently over the intervening years since this topic was first tackled, and we've had the end of the TV show since then, which gives us at least a few more ideas to toss around. We can't take what the TV show gave us as book canon, but we have to be strongly suspicious of a lot of it as being at least the certain story beats are at least somewhat accurate. So we have to at least consider it. And in that process, we've uncovered a lot of new ideas, I think. So really good to revisit this. Super fun. It seems like everybody had a really good time. You had a really good turnout. And as far as what's next for us, yeah, you can find us at historyofwesteros.com, History of Westeros on YouTube. We have a Facebook group that has regular discussions. It's pretty robust. Lots of things going on there. We talk about the chapters that we're reviewing each week for Valar Rereadus and other scheduling things and things that are coming up. We always post there. So also you can follow me on Twitter. I always keep what's coming up to date up there. We keep a pretty good feed of information there and lots of puns. So yeah, that's the best place to interact with us, and we hope to see you over there. And we'll certainly have you on again at some point. We'll have to come up with some cool topic to do on our side of the pond.
I would be delighted and honored. Guys, you know I only take people on here who I would recommend you go and check them out. Please do check out History of Westeros. There's a link down in the description. If you're watching live, there's probably a link over in the chat as well. I'm going to make you disappear for 1 second, Aziz, just so I can go up here somewhere. If you're watching a little bit later, will be appearing a link to some more live streams. So if you'd like to watch a few more live streams, that's there. Up here somewhere will be appearing a link to my Patreon page if you are interested in either supporting the channel or getting access to some of the things I do exclusively for my patrons, like those bonus travelers guides I'll be doing in a few weeks' time. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for the super chats. Thank you for the fantastic questions we've had both from my patrons and in the chat there. Take care, everyone. I'll be back next week with another hopefully interesting topic. I haven't got anyone lined up yet, so it might be a solo one next week. But same time next week. Take care, everyone. I will see you again soon.